They thought my family's historic land was just free real estate for their pastel-colored suburban expansion. Hit that subscribe button right now, because watching a power-tripping HOA board try to bully a multi-generational rancher only to face the most massive, legally devastating counteroffensive of the year is a justice story you cannot afford to skip. My name is Marcus, and I own a sprawling 400-acre cattle ranch that has belonged to my family for over a century. Our property line sits directly adjacent to Whispering Pines, a hyper-regulated, cookie-cutter subdivision full of identical houses, manicured lawns, and an HOA board with a collective god complex. For years, the Whispering Pines Association treated our fence line like their personal dumping ground. They complained about the dust from our dirt roads, demanded we cut down our ancient oak trees because their leaves drifted into their pristine swimming pools, and whined that the natural sounds of livestock interfered with their peaceful evening wine-sipping sessions. I ignored them. My land, my rules. Until Tuesday morning, when I rode my horse down to the eastern boundary fence and found something that made my blood run cold. A sleek, metal blue and white sign had been bolted directly into my century-old cedar post. In crisp corporate lettering, it declared, Whispering Pines Community Zone. No heavy vehicles, no livestock noise beyond 8 p.m., and parking prohibited by order of the HOA Architectural Committee. They didn't just step onto my property. They tried to legally annex it. I stared at the sign in disbelief, my fingers gripping my reins as anger surged through my chest. But as I looked closer down the tree line, I saw 5 more identical signs stretching as far as the eye could see. They thought they could bully an independent rancher out of his own homestead. They had no idea what kind of monster they had just woken up. I didn't yell. I didn't rip the signs down in a blind rage. Instead, I pulled a heavy wrench from my saddlebag, unbolted every single metal marker, loaded them into the back of my truck, and drove straight down to the subdivision's main entrance. Whispering Pines was designed like a fortress, complete with automatic security gates, manicured flower beds, and a gleaming community clubhouse. Sitting right on the front lawn, sipping iced tea under a pastel patio umbrella, was Linda Gable, the self-appointed president of the HOA Architectural Committee. Linda ruled the subdivision like a tiny dictator, wearing oversized sunglasses and a matching tennis visor, always hunting for minor infractions to find her neighbors over. When she saw my dusty pickup truck idling across the community turf, her pristine expression twisted into a look of absolute disgust. She stood up smoothing her designer tennis skirt, grabbed her clipboard, and marched right over to my driver's side window with her chin held high in the air. "Mr. Miller," Linda snapped, tapping her manicured fingernail against my door frame. "You are driving an unapproved commercial vehicle across private subdivision turf, and those mud-caked tires are violating our strict aesthetic code. Move this truck immediately or I will have it towed." I slowly rolled down my window, keeping my expression completely stone-cold. I reached into the truck bed, grabbed the stack of metal HOA signs I had just unbolted from my ranch, and dumped the heavy pile right onto her manicured grass with a loud, echoing clatter. Linda gasped, jumping back as if a rattlesnake had slithered out of the pile. You removed association property," Linda shrieked, her voice cracking in pure disbelief. "Those signs establish our legal expansion boundary. You have no right to touch them." "Those signs were bolted onto my family's private land, Linda," I replied, my voice deep and steady. "Property that has belonged to my grandfather and my father for over 100 years. You don't own my ranch." Linda tossed her blonde bob back, flashing a venomous, triumphant smirk. "We actually do, Mr. Miller. The county zoning board approved our neighborhood expansion plan last month. If your historical acreage falls within our perimeter sweep, you are legally bound by our community covenant. Take those signs back, or our legal team will slap a $20,000 lien on your ranch by tomorrow morning." She thought she had backed me into a corner. She believed her little corporate paperwork could rewrite a century of property deed. She had no idea that I hadn't spent the morning just removing her cheap aluminum signs. I had spent it at the county clerk's office, pulling the master historical land grants and filing an emergency counter-survey. And what Linda didn't know was that her precious subdivision clubhouse, and half the land her luxury homes sat on, was actually built on a historic water easement owned by my family. Linda stood there with her hands planted firmly on her hips, her smile dripping with malice as she waited for me to panic. "You have 24 hours to comply with the expansion boundary, Marcus," Linda warned, leaning in close to my window. "By tomorrow evening, our legal team will have your ranch locked down, and we'll start grading your south pasture for our new community parking lot." I didn't argue with her. I didn't raise my voice or throw threats. I just gave her a slow, deliberate nod, put my truck into gear, and drove off without saying another word. Let her enjoy her little power trip while it lasted. Because while Linda was busy measuring fence lines and daydreaming about paving over my grandfather's pasture, my legal team and I had spent the entire morning executing a much larger, highly calculated maneuver. We didn't just pull historical land grant. We discovered a massive, legally binding clerical error in Whispering Pine's original development filings from 25 years ago. When the subdivision's original corporate developers built their gleaming community pool, tennis courts, and the southern half of their luxury homes, they accidentally built them directly over a primary municipal water easement and agricultural right-of-way belonging to my family's historic estate. An easement that had never been legally abandoned or sold. By Tuesday afternoon, the county surveyor's office had officially verified the coordinate. The entire multi-million-dollar community clubhouse complex sat squarely on my family's private land right. And under state property statutes, any unauthorized permanent structure built over an active private water easement without notarized renewal becomes the legal property of the landholder within 72 hours of formal notice. The clock was ticking. And 0 hour was Wednesday morning at 8 sharp. By 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, the quiet morning air over Whispering Pines was shattered by the heavy rumble of industrial diesel engines. 3 large, flatbed county transport trucks, accompanied by 2 armed county sheriff deputies and our family's lead real estate attorney, rolled right down the main boulevard of the subdivision. They didn't stop at the entrance gate. They drove straight past the manicured flower beds and parked right in front of the multi-million-dollar community clubhouse. Residents rushed out of their luxury homes in bathrobes and workout gear, staring in absolute bewilderment as the deputies stepped out of their cruisers. Right on cue, Linda Gable burst out of the clubhouse front doors, her face flushed with absolute fury, waving a thick binder in the air like a weapon. "What is the meaning of this?" Linda shrieked, marching right up to the lead deputy. "This is private subdivision property. You cannot park commercial vehicles here. I demand you cite these trespassers immediately." The lead deputy didn't even flinch. He calmly unclipped his notebook, flipped to a certified county document, and handed a crisp, heavy-stock legal packet directly into her trembling hands. "Mrs. Gable, you are looking at an official notice of easement execution and property repossession," the deputy announced loud enough for the gathering crowd of homeowners to hear. "Under verified county land grant records, this entire clubhouse, the community pool complex, and the southern access road sit entirely on an active water and agricultural easement belonging to the Miller estate." Linda stared at the paper as if it were written in an alien language, her eyes darting back and forth across the bold legal stamps. That's impossible," Linda gasped, her voice cracking in pure panic. "We bought this land from the original developers 20 years ago. We have a corporate charter. We have an HOA board. Your corporate charter failed to verify its boundary deeds, Mrs. Gable." Our attorney stepped forward, holding up a certified plat map. "Which means under state property law, any unauthorized permanent structure residing on an unreleased private easement reverts entirely to the landholder after formal notice. As of 8:30 this morning, The Miller estate officially forecloses on all structural assets built on Parcel 12. Linda stood frozen in the middle of the paved courtyard, her face turning a pale, ghostly shade of white as the reality of what she had done finally set in. She thought her HOA bylaws were an impenetrable iron fortress. She believed she could bully a generational rancher and annex his land with a few cheap aluminum signs. She didn't realize that I hadn't spent the last 6 months fighting her petty notices. I had been waiting for her to cross the final property line. I stepped out of my truck, wearing my worn leather boots and a classic canvas field jacket, walking slowly toward the center of the courtyard as the neighborhood watched in dead silence. I looked down at Linda, who was now trembling so violently she could barely hold her clipboard. "You wanted to expand your boundaries, Linda," I said softly, letting my voice echo across the quiet subdivision. "So I decided to help you out. Welcome to my ranch."
The subdivision descended into absolute, deafening chaos. Real estate speculators and homeowners who had spent years cowering under Linda's tyrannical fine-happy regime now stood on their front lawns, watching in absolute shock as county work crews began unbolting the luxury entry gates and replacing the custom Whispering Pines security signs with heavy steel posts bearing the official crest of the Miller estate. Linda Gable collapsed onto a wrought iron bench by the dry fountain, staring vacantly at the ground, completely stripped of her untouchable authority. Her board members had already fled back inside their houses, too cowardly to face the neighborhood they had helped destroy. I didn't tear down their homes, and I didn't evict the innocent families who had simply wanted a quiet place to live. They were victims of Linda's corporate overreach just as much as my family's ranch had been. Instead, my first official act as the legal owner of the Whispering Pines clubhouse and common grounds was to post a massive, brightly painted wooden banner directly across the front entrance. HOA board dissolved. All predatory fines canceled. Community property open to all residents free of charge. The local news crews arrived by noon, broadcasting the spectacular downfall of the corrupt HOA across the entire state. Within 48 hours, an emergency neighborhood recall vote stripped Linda of her title forever, leaving her drowning in an avalanche of financial audits and internal investigations over where the association's reserve funds had actually gone. As for my family's ranch, by Sunday evening, the eastern fence line was quiet and peaceful once again. The metal signs they had tried to bolt onto our cedar posts were melted down and turned into a simple, sturdy gate latch. I stood out on the front porch of the old ranch house, holding a warm cup of coffee, looking out over the rolling green pastures of land that had belonged to my grandfather, my father, and now safely back in our hands. Some people just need a reminder. I muttered to the evening breeze, watching the sun dip low behind the horizon, that a few cheap plastic signs don't make you a king,